Hello, once again, friends, and thank you for tuning into the Leo and Larry show. I'm Leo.
And I'm Larry.
Yes, and today we have as a guest one of our members of Congress, Congressman Ro Khanna from the 17th District of California. Glad to have you here with us, Congressman. Um, Give us greetings and tell us about yourself.
Well, Reverend Woodbury, Larry, thank you for having me. It's a great honor. I am Ro Khanna. I represent Silicon Valley and the United States Congress, which has a lot of the tech companies, Apple, Google, Tesla, Intel, Yahoo, Cisco. I got my start in public service working for President Obama as his Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce when he was in the White House, and actually worked on his very first campaign when I was a student at college at University of Chicago, and he was running for the state Senate. I was born in Philadelphia in 1976, our bicentenary. My parents are immigrants from India, and my grandfather, who's my hero, was involved in Gandhi's independence movement, served in jail for 6 years, fighting for India's independence, and lived to see a free India. And of course, that movement, Gandhi's movement, influenced Reverend Lawson and Dr. King, who famously carried a Gandhi reader and the Bible wherever he went. And it was the civil rights movement that made room for people like me, because before 1965 in this country, if you were Asian, if you were African, you basically couldn't immigrate. Immigration was heavily skewed towards Europe, and it was the civil rights movement that leads to the 1965 Immigration Act that allows my parents to come to the United States. So it's been a long journey for my family, but I love representing Silicon Valley and look forward to this conversation.
Great, wonderful. You know, I often tell people that one of my favorite quotations is from Mahatma Gandhi, and that quotation is, "The earth has enough for everyone's needs, but not enough for everyone's greed." And so, and Dr. King, and as you said, so many others were inspired by Gandhi. A lot of folks don't know that he was actually deported from South Africa because of his anti-apartheid work. He was trying to get rid of apartheid, and they sent him back to India, and where he led the movement to free India from the British. And it's great to know that your grandfather was a part of that liberation movement. Want to talk a little bit about, because you represent, you represented a district with probably all of Silicon Valley, and I know that that has been very influential in your work and also your view of how we should deal with problems and issues and situations in America. I know that you have a new book out. You were kind enough to send it to me after we met in Washington, and also at Coker University, where you spoke at the invitation from Professor Mal Hyman. Can you tell us a little bit about your book, Dignity in a Digital Age, and how technology can help all of us?
Sure, Reverend Woodbury. The crux of the book, I mean, my district has a market value of $10 trillion of Apple, Google, Intel, Yahoo, Cisco, LinkedIn. There are going to be 25 million of these digital jobs by 2025. Yet this economy has basically excluded Black people, Latino community, totally excluded from modern wealth generation. I wrote an op-ed with Mr. Lewis, the late Mr. Lewis, where we were talking about my grandfather and Gandhi's movement and civil rights movement, his, of course, iconic sacrifices. And he had a line at the end of the op-ed. He said, technology rights are the new civil rights. We will never overcome the racial wealth gap in this country, which is $10 for every white family to every $1 for every Black family, if we don't overcome the racial wealth generation gap. So I have been focused on how do we get these opportunities to people who don't have them. And there's an ambition amongst the young generation, particularly in the Black South, to build wealth, to create jobs. And they don't have often the pathways, the opportunities. I'll give you two concrete examples of what we've done. I set up at Benedict College. In fact, I'm coming on April 14th to Benedict with Google, a program to provide a $5,000 stipend for these young kids, an 18-month course that Benedict and Google co-teach that'll end up having $65,000 to $70,000 jobs for these young folks when they're done with it. Why can't we do that at every HBCU in this country? Why can't we have a goal to have 1 million Black and brown digital jobs by 2025? I've set up at Claflin with Zoom another partnership to get young people their opportunities to work at Claflin, and Claflin's at Zoom, and Zoom has given a $5 million scholarship to Claflin. A lot of my work has been how do we get technology into rural communities, into Black and brown communities? How do we get more Americans participating in modern wealth generation?
Mm-hmm. Larry, I know you have something to say about that, right? Or some questions.
The first thing, well, a couple of things. One is San Francisco a part of your district?
San Francisco is right outside. That's Nancy Pelosi's district. My district is Cupertino, Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, San Jose, Fremont, where Apple, Google, where a lot of the tech companies are.
Mhm.
The second thing, well, second, I'm a Benedict alumnus, first of all. And so I appreciate the activity that you have moving in our direction. The question I've got is, I was listening to a program, I think a couple of days ago, and the average tech salary is more like 290, not 70,000. It's more like 290. Am I misquoting that number, or is that number for people who have certain experiences in certain ways? Because the number I've gotten when we talked about layoffs at Silicon Valley, and they talked about Google laying off people and Apple laying off people, and actually Google and Apple are actually my clients. So and Facebook are my clients. But at the end of the day, the number that I'm hearing coming down the pipe is that number is more like $290,000 on average salary per person working in Silicon Valley, or for a person who's working in tech.
So you're right in some of the very high-end jobs at Google and at Facebook and at Apple, but that wouldn't be the average starting salary. That would be the average salary probably 5-10 years into your career. And those would be at the very top tech companies. But the median tech salary in the country, I know just because I wrote the book, is about 80,000. And of course, it's dependent on geography. So the companies pay more where the cost of living is higher. But this is why we need to get more people into the pipeline to get those $300,000, $400,000 jobs. But I don't want to be unrealistic. I mean, not everyone is going to get to just work at Google or Apple or Facebook. But there are at least 500 Fortune 500 companies that are going to need people employed in tech as well. And these are jobs that can get to the middle class, upper middle class, even create great wealth.
What are our high schools not doing, and a junior high school is not doing? I've got a 13-year-old grandson who wants to be a coder, who's talking about being a coder at this particular stage in his life. What are we not getting, especially in the Southern United States? What are we not getting that are providing the tools and the resources for our young people to get to that particular area?
First is the mentorship. One of the things we found at these programs of the HBCUs is they talk to someone at Google every month. You know, one of the biggest things I had, the difficulty of breaking into politics when I was getting into politics, is there was no other Indian American at the time in Congress. There was no other Indian American who was a state representative. I couldn't talk to people in my own community about what it's like, about how you go about doing it. And that made it harder. And one of the challenges I think people have is they don't have a clear mentor or role model about how do you prepare for these things? What are whiteboard interviews? Who do you talk to? What are the internships you want to do? The second thing is a lack of opportunity. I used to joke, I taught at Stanford, and I joked that my students had funding before they had an idea, just based on their network. And you'll have the same type of ambition at Claflin, the same type of ambition at Benedict, but those students, they don't know where to go with their business plans. They don't have people that can go fund them. So I would say role models, opportunity, and then of course you need technology, a training and a celebration of STEM. I still remember I grew up a sports fan, but I used to be on my math team in 8th grade, and I remember kids used to make fun of me for being on the math team. And we got to change that culture. I mean, there's no you can root for Jalen Hurts, who's the Philadelphia quarterback, and still be good at math. That there's not there should not be a stigma to success in science and math, and there needs to be more celebration of that in our schools.
Well, doesn't that start at the home level? Doesn't that start not when we get to the role models and when we get to college, or even when we get to high school or junior high school, but if the parents are not pressing for our kids to take more difficult courses, for kids to, like you said, to take what you consider the nerdy courses, then the reality becomes that the child is not motivated to take the course, and they do what it takes to get by. What kind of value do you place in the parental role?
That plays a huge value. I mean, my parents, my father, when I got 90% on an exam, would say, "Where's the other 10%?" And that was the way I was raised, with that kind of expectation of excellence in education. Now, my parents came with nothing in this country, but they came with my father came with an engineering degree. And I think we have to figure out how do we inculcate that love of excellence in education across the country, but there also have to be the opportunities. I mean, you're not going to do that if people don't think that there's a job at the end of it, if they don't think that they're going to have real opportunity, if they're going to schools that are run down. So it's a combination of the parents, but it's also the society to support the family.
Mhm. Yes, Roland. So I had a similar childhood. I could come home with a 90 on the exam, and my parents would ask me, "Well, what did Ira get? What did Roy Rizzo get? And if I said, "Well, he got a 95, why couldn't you get a 95?" So that at the home. Another thing that I consider a challenge is what I call the mystification of technology. So back in the 80s, you were a young Todd. Back in the 80s, when home computers were just getting out into communities, I remember, people that, you went into the store to buy a computer. The salesperson would ask you, how many RAMs do you want? How much ROM do you want? They ask you about bits and bytes and all of this stuff. And I bought one of the first home computers, if you can call them that, the Radio Shack Tandy TRS-80. That didn't even have a screen. You had to hook it up to your TV. And but I really struggled in the beginning of the computer age, getting into homes. And I didn't know how, I'm like, do I need to learn BASIC? Do I need to learn Fortran? I was at my sister's house, asking her, can you explain to me what hexadecimals are, and decimals are. And all of those, that mystification, the language, the technology that comes out at first actually causes people to say, this is too hard. I don't understand this. This is not for me. And so a lot of that is I find is what has people kind of mystified and believing that they can't get involved with. So how do we demystify technology? You said in your book that this can help all of us. How can technology help all of us?
Well, Reverend Woodbury, it's a wonderful point, and I think partly as technology has advanced in software, it's actually become much simpler. I often give the example of a car. My dad, when I was growing up, I know he could do everything with the car. He opened the hood, he knew how to change the oil, he knew if there was something that wasn't working, he could fix it, certainly with the tires. I got to confess, I can't do a whole lot with the car, and I don't need to do a whole lot with the car. Now the cars are pretty much self-operating. And the same thing is true with technology. It used to be in the 1980s, you had to know RAM and this and that. And you had to, now you just press a button and everything works. Now you use your phone and it's pretty self-navigating. As technology advances, it actually becomes simpler. And what is the beauty of AI to some extent is you don't need to know a lot of programming now. Now, to use the technology, you can use the technology to figure out how to do sales, how to organize things, how to get machines to talk to each other, and it doesn't require a lot of complexity. So people should not be intimidated from learning about technology, and they should learn about technology even if they don't want to go into technology. Because whether you want to become a politician or whether you want to become an actor or whether you want to go into journalism, technology is going to have a big part of it. And what I've been so heartened at programs like Benedict is we've taken people who had very little background in technology, and they're loving it, and they're finding it creative, and they're finding it capable of doing it. Now, it requires discipline. It does require hard work. They're working very hard, these students. But it's something that is pretty accessible to anyone.
Mm-hmm. And you serve in Congress on some committees. So I know you serve on a committee or subcommittee that deals with cyber issues, and also you serve on a committee that looks at China and what's going on with China. What are those roles that you play, and how does that impact not only people around the world in this country, but particularly communities in the South and other places where where we don't really know what the challenges, and I'll even say the dangers are of going on Facebook or TikTok or some of those things.
Well, I was just leading a delegation to Taiwan and just got back actually this morning from Taiwan. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest ways that our relationship with China has influenced people in the South, they took a lot of our manufacturing jobs. I mean, we used to make textiles in this country, masks in this country. We used to make steel in this country, aluminum in this country. All of that disappeared. It was a colossal mistake to let so much of our production leave America. And it led to deindustrialization that hurt Black working class folks and white working class folks. Part of what I'm calling for is a new economic patriotism, that we've got to make things in this country again. Make the semiconductors, the advanced chips, but also make steel and textiles and masks and basic drugs in America. And we can do that. That's how we built our middle class. And so how do we do it? Well, we have to have the government help finance some of these factories. We need to look at places where they left. We need to do it in consideration for good environmental standards. We need to make sure these jobs are paying a good prevailing wage, that they're open to people of all backgrounds. But I think the combination of a reindustrialization of our country with the spread of these technology jobs can help bring prosperity, bring the American dream to places that currently don't have that or have seen it slipping away.
Mm-hmm. And so the question with that is that along with these jobs, or even with manufacturing, now that we have a lot of robotics, We have automation. We have 3D printing. And so while this can create jobs, manufacturing doesn't need as many jobs that it once did. And then, we also have the automation where now if I go to Olive Garden or I go to McDonald's, I don't even have to order my food. I can do that via the technology, and I can even pay for it at my table. And if they had a robot who brought me my food, so part of my concern is, as we talk about, rebuilding industrialization in America, but at the same time using technology, in terms of robotics and automation, how do we ensure that we employ masses of people? And also, what happens to our tax base? So I, for one, when I go into Walmart or somewhere, I never use the self-checkout machines. And the reason why I do that is, one, I'm a former union man, Communication Workers of America, so I believe in people going to work. But one, that's one less. My first reason is, when I use self checkout, that means that one less person is working. One less person at work also means that's one less person who is having taxes taken out of their check, which pays for our roads, our schools, etc. So I understand what you're saying, and this would actually help us to rebuild our economy so we don't have to work on challenges around supply chain issues, etc. But are we really going to be able to put masses of people to work just with this approach? Or are there some other things that we need to look at or that you're advocating for?
I do think we'll be able to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. You look at the two Intel factories in Ohio, they're creating 10,000 jobs, not just for electricians and plumbers and engineers, but also for the construction workers who are building those factories. So these jobs have a multiplier effect. They're good paying jobs, they're high paying jobs. Partly, if you're productive, that means you should be being paid more because you're being productive with all the technology. So they're high paying jobs. And then when the community gets them, those folks go into the restaurants. They need the conveniences of a masseuse or a barber shop. They need to have building of construction and housing, and it fuels the rejuvenation of a community. Now, there is technology to these manufacturing jobs. If we were just trying to reinvent the manufacturing of the past, we wouldn't be able to compete with China, with Mexico, with Vietnam. That's why I want some of these folks designing the technology for manufacturing, being the ones who are operating the robots, designing the software for how these machines communicate. But what we saw in 1970 to 2000, Reverend Woodbury, in this country, is that manufacturing output increased by 20% in America, and employment increased by 20%. So while there was automation and productivity increases, the production increased as well to make sure that there was that actual employment. What has killed the employment in this country is trade. It's a World Trade Organization. When China went there, all our production left, and so much of our production left with NAFTA. So I would not get in these bad trade deals. I'd have massive financing of making things in this country. I'd make sure that the technology jobs were also being open to people in these communities so that they weren't just in the production jobs, but also in the software that was designing these factories. And then I would have a lot of service jobs around them and make sure that you had unionization, both on the factory jobs and the service jobs, so people were being paid a fair wage. So I don't think production is the only answer to America's economy, but I don't think you can be a strong economy without production. The last country that lost its production was Great Britain, and look at what's happened to their economy. So I would say a focus on production renewal, but making sure workers are well paid, can unionize, and then using that to expand the service space and having unionization in services as well.
Okay, I agree with that. Also, I was part of a group of people of unions that went to Washington, D.C. when President Clinton fast-tracked NAFTA. And for our audience, when something is fast-tracked, that means it skips committees and discussions. And so I don't think that the American people and even some businesses knew what the consequences that NAFTA would bring to this country. But I know I opposed it from the very beginning.
You were ahead of your times.
Well, I mean, when I came to South Carolina, this place, we had a lot of manufacturing. People were building homes. They were opening up businesses. Larry, you remember that time, right? It was booming. And then when all of the manufacturing left, we still have not, and in South Carolina and other places, we still have not recovered from that. And that was one of the things that attracted me to the area. How about you, Larry? Because it was a kind of boom then, right?
First of all, let me say, Billy Joe living here in Allentown. Now, I think the congressman will understand that.
Mhm.
And understanding that while there's I don't think NAFTA was the best way to go at the particular time.
Mhm.
I think there's a component that's being left out of this discussion, and that component is fairly simple. If America closes its borders and produces most of its products in America, and China produces most of its products in China, and Russia produces most of its products in Russia, and India being the largest market in the world right now, they produce their products in India, then what we've got is isolationism again. We go back to almost some form of Cold War, because now GM is not going to be able to sell cars in China. Ford is not going to be able to sell cars in China. And that becomes the question. I mean, see, there's a thin line here between, and I agree with the congressman, and I agree with President Biden on bringing as many jobs back to our borders. But at the same time that we're bringing these jobs back to our borders, we're also closing our borders in a way, and China's closing their borders, and all of the other major powers are closing their borders because they realize that China's is what, the second largest consumer market in the world, only second to India. And so when you talk about consumer markets, when you talk about, can America live, in the United States, I should say, can they live by just producing products, major products in the United States without having those components made in China, or those components made in Vietnam or someplace else? And that becomes the question. That the bigger question is not whether we need to bring jobs home. We do need to bring jobs home, but we need to look at a living wage in America versus a living wage in India. And we need to look at a living wage in China. One of the things that China has done, and the congressman said he just left China this morning, so he understands it better than I do. That the reality of it is, one of the things they've done is, because they've been so productive, and because they start making iron and steel and all the other products that we usually made in the United States, because that happened, they build up an economy where income levels rose in China. And one of the reasons that NAFTA was put in place was because there was the assumption, and we were being told, that we couldn't compete in the world marketplace because our income levels were too high compared to the rest of the world.
Mhm. And let me add before the congressman responds. China is, because every time I go to Africa, in different African countries, China is tapping into one of the biggest consumer markets on this planet, which is Africa. Everywhere you go, they're building. If your car stops, people are walking up and down selling hats and T-shirts and products, and they're all made in China. So I'm going to stop there because that question was directed towards you, Congressman.
Well, Larry, I think you put it very poignantly about the importance of not becoming protectionist. And as a son of immigrants, I certainly am not for America building walls or disengaging from the world. Let me give you two concrete answers to your point. One, I was just in Taiwan where I met this man, Morris Chang. Morris Chang is the father of the entire Taiwanese semiconductor industry. Today, most of our chips are being produced in Taiwan. Let me tell you what Morris Chang said to me. He said, I'm a proud expat. Morris Chang is an American. He came to America to study at MIT, to study at Stanford, and he worked at Texas Instruments for 25 years. And he wanted to build the semiconductor production in the United States. But as an Asian man, he was passed over as CEO of Texas Instruments. He was growing up in the 50s. He was in his 50s in the 1980s. There was a lot of discrimination then still against Asian Americans who were CEOs or in positions of leadership. He didn't see a future in America. And so he went in Taiwan and he built the entire semiconductor industry there. What a loss for the United States of America that we didn't keep the Morris Chang here. We need immigrants in America, people from around the world, to be building our industries. And we shouldn't be closing our borders to people like Morris Chang. The second point is I agree with you that supply chains are going to be global. You can't make every single thing in America, but we can make some things in America. We shouldn't have the massive trade deficits. We've got a $400 billion trade deficit in China. As one union worker in the IBEW said to me, he said, I'm happy to buy pencils if they'll buy our paper, but I'm not going to buy both the pencils and the paper from one country. Right now, what you got going on is America's buying everything and we're not selling enough. Last time we've had a trade surplus in this country was 1975. So I'm not for disengaging from the world, but I'm for rebalancing our trade with China. I said, this president, we should have a goal every year to lower our trade deficit by 10%, to build some of the industry in this country, the basic steel, masks, aluminum, some of the basic textiles, put people to work, start to build the key foundations in this country, and then still to have global supply chains and to trade, but to trade on more balanced terms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to turn to another thing, that's been discussed a lot, and Senator Bernie Sanders has been promoting for a long, long time. And, we were recently in England, and I spoke with some people there about their free healthcare. What's your position on that? How is it that we are the only developed country on the planet that doesn't have free healthcare for its citizens?
It's criminal. It's criminal. I mean, Dr. King said of all the deprivations, of the deprivation of education, the deprivation of a job, the deprivation of healthcare was the most inhumane because it could actually mean death. It could actually mean the loss of physical life. I'm paraphrasing, but that was basically how he put it, that was the most inhumane of the deprivation. I was just in Taiwan. I had something in my eye. I got a little bit of an eye infection, a conjunctivitis. So I said, okay, I need to go get eye drops. I guess I walk into a pharmacy and I don't have any insurance, obviously, there, and I'm in a foreign country. And they give me 2 prescription eye drops. And guess how much it costs?
I'm afraid to ask. $3.
$3. You go to Walgreens. I just came. I got back to the airport. I had to get Visine, and at the airport it cost me $14 just for Visine. $3 for 2 prescriptions for my eyes. for someone who's just traveling there. And they have these clinics everywhere, and they've got single payer healthcare. They cover every person there. This should be a basic Bernie Sanders Medicare for all. All he's saying is that every person in this country should have healthcare from the day they are born. That no one should go into medical debt. By the way, the biggest medical debt is in the South, and it's in the Black South. That's the highest medical debt. It destroys people's credit. I don't understand how this is debated. I don't understand why we aren't all saying, yes, in the richest country in the world, we can afford this. And by the way, the guy who has the most billionaires anywhere is me in my district. And I'm saying, tax them. They keep sending me back to Congress. Tax them. We have the money. Tax them so we can provide everyone healthcare in this country. It's just inhumane that we don't have that in America.
So, well, we know what's happening with the pharmaceutical company and the medical industrial complex is that once we have free healthcare that's managed and legislated by the government, there's going to be limits on how much they can charge. I mean, that's the obvious and the only impediment that I can come up with. That, you know, and you mentioned eye drops. I had to get some eye drops for a medical problem I was having with my eyes. And I took the prescription, and my wife took it to the pharmacy. They wanted $264 for a 30-day supply. We finally got it down with a coupon. When somebody tells you that much money, over $200, I was happy when it went down to $64. But that's the problem is basically that and if I'm wrong, you're in Congress, so I'm on the outside looking in. But part of the problem is that they would then have to limit what they charge people for healthcare, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the opposition to this is coming from the big pharmaceutical companies. It's coming from the private insurance companies who are making extraordinary profits by selling private insurance. People say, well, you'll lose your freedom if you don't have the private insurance. I have not met someone who's not happy with Medicare, other than that Medicare doesn't cover dental, vision, and hearing. So it should, in long-term care, to make Medicare cover that. But basically, you're giving everyone Medicare. But it's the private insurance companies who are fighting tooth and nail against it. And no one's banning them. If people want to get private health insurance in addition to the Medicare they have, they'll be allowed to do that. But everyone should get basic health care. It's the pharmaceutical companies, the private insurance companies, some of these hospitals that are making out extraordinary amount of money. They're the ones fighting tooth and nail. What's the consequence? America pays about 20% of our GDP in healthcare. That's almost twice as much as the nearest next country. And so we're spending all this money. We don't have the highest healthcare outcomes, and people are being asked to pay a lot, and they're not getting the quality healthcare they deserve.
I'm trying to remember. I think, don't you serve on the Armed Services Committee, or did at one time?
I do. I'm the top Democrat on the Armed Services Cyber Security Quantum AI Committee, and I've been on Armed Services for my 6 years in Congress.
So I'm going to ask you something you may or may not can tell me and the answer to it. So with the big balloon that China had come over the country, our country, and the other balloons that haven't been identified, I'm kind of wondering. They said, well, this was not the first occurrence. That there were actually some similar balloons or whatever they were that also came over our country during the Trump administration. But I haven't heard anything about how long this has been going on, and what are some of the other threats that or problems we're facing when it comes to cybersecurity with our armed forces as well as with everyday citizens. I, for one, after I found out that TikTok belongs to China, I'm like, okay, I don't need you tracking what I'm doing and building algorithms on that. So talk to us about cybersecurity, some from armed forces, what you can perspective, and what that also means for everyday American citizens. And
Well,
and what have you been working on?
for everyday American citizens, the biggest risk is that China, the Communist Party, or other uh, not good actors could be taking our data. Anytime you're using TikTok, anytime you're using a platform that is controlled by a Chinese company, they could be taking the data and using it to create algorithms and target us with propaganda. And China has been doing this in other countries where they've been unleashing propaganda to be either anti-American propaganda or influence people to not care about human rights, particularly young people. They try to influence them on these platforms. So we need to make sure that we're preventing foreign countries, China, Russia, Iran, from infiltrating these social media platforms and pushing their own propaganda on them. In terms of surveillance, that we have to do a much better job now shooting down these balloons before they cross American airspace. I don't think that's going to be tolerated ever again now that it's become public and people are aware of the risks. And then we need to protect our own defense and critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. The modern war is likely to start with cyber attacks. Even in Ukraine, we saw Russia engage in cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, electricity, water, power plants, of making sure that they're protected from a cyber attack that could take them down.
Mhm. We've had some probes into our systems anyway, right? And our banking systems in other places and in other places in the United States, correct?
We have, and the challenge is that all these companies have basically private security against cyber. I mean, imagine if you were a Walmart or a bank and you had to have your own police force because the government wasn't protecting you against cyber attacks. Right now, that's basically the case. I mean, the government protects the sensitive defense equipment and government equipment, but if you're a bank, if you're have assets, you have to provide your own cyber defense. And one of the things we have to do as a government is assist these companies in defending themselves against these bad actors.
Mhm. Well, I'm sure that all nations, including ours, they do some things around cyber surveillance and that sort of thing, and I don't want to know. Okay. Um,
But
I-
we got to be prepared. Yeah.
mhm. Okay. Um, and the other thing is, again, I like to go back to your book again. And is there anything else you want to lift up when you say that dignity in a digital age? My concern is that thus far in America, and I'm going all the way back to, the industrial age, steam engines, that sort of thing, we've always had a gap. We've always had a gap when it comes to people of color and poor people. You know, um, even now, and I mentioned, we had computers and the internet's been around since the 90s, and especially in rural areas, we're still having to bring Wi-Fi, to bring the internet, high-speed internet to parts of our communities, and it always seems that it's people of color communities and poor communities that are left out and left behind because of the gap when it comes to implementing things. Does your book or any of your work, beyond working with HBCUs, anything you could tell us where we could minimize or make sure that there is no gap?
Yes, Reverend Woodbury, I write extensively about these topics, about how there is such a gap in terms of access to high-speed internet, in terms of access to capital to start small businesses and startups, in terms of access to venture capital, in terms of access to jobs in communities to color. And what I say is the agricultural revolution left out Black Americans. The Industrial Revolution left out Black Americans. Shame on us in the 21st century if the technology revolution is going to leave out Black Americans. Have we learned nothing? Have we not advanced? Has there been no progress since Jim Crow? I mean, we know that Black farmers didn't get USDA grants. We know that a lot of the industrial grants and opportunities did not go to African Americans. And we're replicating the same thing with the technology revolution. People should be screaming about this. They should be screaming about the lack of representation in modern wealth generation for the Black and brown communities. And this is a fixable problem. We need massive investment in high-speed internet in every community, and not just giving those contracts to the private companies, but giving them to municipalities so that they can help build those opportunities. We've discussed this, making sure that when we come to these job training programs, we're not just creating the program and leaving, but we're training the community itself to have that expertise so that they can replicate that for decades to come in their communities, investing in those communities, making sure that we're now where you can do a job anywhere in the country. These jobs, these good paying jobs, they can go up to $300,000, very accessible to people who have that ambition in the South. You go to Atlanta, there's a hunger there, an ambition there that young people have. And I'll just be candid. I've had so many young Black men and women come up to me and say, yeah, we want to make sure that we can vote. And yeah, we want to make sure that we don't get shot in the street by a police officer if we don't have any arms. But we got more than that. We want to have a good job. We want to get a good opportunity. We want to start a business. Where are we? What are we doing for that? And that's really what a lot of the book is about. And then when it comes beyond technology, I think on a very simple basis, Reverend Woodbury, I just want in this country for people to have the chance I did. I was a son of immigrants. My mom was a school teacher. My dad, middle engineer, middle employee, middle level employee in his company. But I'll tell you what, I got to go to a good public school. I got to go to a dentist twice a year. I never had to worry about going to see an allergist or a doctor. I had to take out a lot of loans to finish my education, but I got a good education. You're telling me we can't do that for every American? What this country could do for a son of immigrants? Why? That's all that we're talking about. That's all Bernie Sanders was talking about. Healthcare for everyone, education for everyone, basic investments for people so that they can live up to their potential.
Well, I have a suggestion, something you might look into, where we might be able to narrow or prevent a gap, and that's with what the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation is doing right now around installing electric chargers for cars, bikes, etc. And so I understand that the plan is to do this in phases, interstates first, urban areas, and then later on get to the poor communities in rural areas. And that sounds like that might make a gap again. And I actually had a chance to talk with some manufacturers of charging stations. And when I brought that up about maybe the phase approach is not the best, their concern was, well, how many people are going to own electric vehicles? How much traffic will there be in rural areas? So their profit motive was the reason why they felt like, well, this should be these communities should be the last one to get charging stations. So my suggestion that something you may look at is why can't that be done simultaneously? Why can't we do interstates or urban centers at the same time that we're also putting charging stations in rural communities and also in low wealth communities? I know there's some financial aspects and tax credits or rebates or something that could be put in place. But I would just like to give you that as something to think about and how we might be able to have some equity rather than another digital gap.
And that's a wonderful suggestion, Reverend Woodbury, and I agree with you. The phased approach is already consigning people in rural communities to the last of the line, and that's not right. And if we have to have some subsidization to make it simultaneous, we should, so that people feel like their kids and their families have an equal shot at the modern economy, at the green economy. And I will work with you to see what we can do on that issue.
And that would be great. I have some more suggestions, and we would appreciate any support our community can get. I know we're probably getting close to the end. Larry, did you have something you wanted to say in closing to the congressman or your closing remark?
Well, Congressman, I find myself, first of all, Google has an operation here in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina. And I think Facebook has an operation here as well in South Carolina. And my concern is that I looked at President Biden's African plan recently, and I couldn't help but laugh out loud at the lack of investment that he's talking about, buying cell phones to women in South Africa, or buying, helping them to grow rice, or helping them to do something. And I think the whole package was less than $100 million, which is
that's absurd. Yeah, I didn't know.
And that's a joke. And the reality of it is, you're in Silicon Valley. Now, I know you want to keep your constituents in Silicon Valley, but if you're going to get serious about Africa, why not start by doing some manufacturing facilities in Africa that would accommodate, because the Chinese are already there, and like Reverend Woodbury said earlier, they're selling everything from dashikis to everything else that you can imagine in Africa. Why not get serious about an investment in Africa that creates a facility in Africa that is going to be, whether it's technology or whether it's manufacturing furniture or whether it's manufacturing some other product that is going to raise the level of the economy in Africa. And the same thing in India. I think we hear this conversation about, we want to invest in this or we want to invest in this, but you're basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater in a situation, and you're not really making an investment. It's symbolic in its nature more than it is actuality and reality.
I agree with you. I think the United States has not been engaged nearly enough in Africa or in Latin America. You know, I met President Lula recently from Brazil, and he said to me, Congressman, every time I go to these international forums in Latin America, South America, I see every other country other than the United States. You're absent. You don't even show up to the conferences. And we're not showing up to the conferences in Africa. And China is showing up. And they're showering these countries with money, with investment, with setting up industry, and in the process, almost a form of neo-colonialism. Now, I don't think we should do that. I think Africa should decide what's in Africa's future. You know, I very much believe, given my grandfather's history and self-determination of people, but I think we have to look at the talent, the extraordinary potential of Africa, and build investment opportunity for foreign direct investment, build partnerships for manufacturing that will help both people. And, let me just be very candid. We owe a moral debt to the continent of Africa after the slave trade and what we did. I mean, the world owes a moral debt, and the United States owes a moral debt. So I agree with you. It's in our strategic interest to have greater engagement, and it's also in our moral responsibility to do it. And $100 million is that's just
The 68 countries is
shameful.
In 68 countries, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and so we need a real vision there, and it's a vision for global leadership, and it's a vision for engagement. One of the people who I'm hopeful will do it is Jonathan Jackson. He's on the Foreign Relations Committee. He's Jesse Jackson's son, one of my close friends in Congress, just got elected. He's going to be on the Foreign Affairs Africa subcommittee, and we were just talking. He was in Taiwan with me, and I said, Jonathan, you got to lead. You got to change the mindset here. We got to be serious about our engagement with Africa. So I'm hoping maybe he can help provide that leadership, and I certainly will support that.
But I think when you have the larger corporations like you have that are investing all over the world, and we understand that they're looking for inexpensive labor. I don't know if you can find more inexpensive labor than in that. So it's not a labor issue, and from the people that we have coming to the United States from African countries, it's not a training issue because they're very, very trainable. Some of the best minds in America are Africans. So the reality of it is that you said Africa, and then you said South America. What do those two continents have in common? They're dark-skinned people.
Right. Yeah, and we're running out of time. As I said from the beginning, I knew this was going to be a very fruitful and exciting and stimulating conversation. And you're absolutely right, Larry. And maybe, Congressman, would you like to come back on?
No, I'd love to. If you guys would have me back at some point, I'd love to.
Okay, great, because definitely we're closing on the issue around geopolitics, where the politics, the economics, where does that land when we talk about geography and that sort of thing, which is why Latin America and Africa is that both continents are often left out. But Loretta and others are frantically telling me that we're running out of time, so we're going to have to close here. Thank you so much, Congressman, for, we know you have a busy schedule and a lot of other things that you could do, and our audience, and as well as myself and Larry Smith, thank you. Do you want to tell people how they can reach you if they have questions or want to contact you? And then Larry and I will do the same.
Well, thank you, Reverend Woodbury. Thank you, Larry. You've given me a lot to think about. And I think while the core of my platform is going to be an economic patriotism and bringing jobs here, I think Larry is right to point out that it has to be with an engagement of the world, with an engagement of Africa, with an engagement of Latin America, with a view of uplifting people and humanity, not just ourselves. And of course, that was in the best traditions of Gandhi or Mandela or Dr. King, the North Star of people who I look up to in shaping my own politics. People can reach me at ro@rokhanna.com, ro@rokhanna.com. They can follow me on Twitter at Ro Khanna or at Facebook at Ro Khanna. And I really value your counsel, Reverend Woodbury, you know that. And Larry, I look forward to building the friendship and learning from you.
Like I said, you've already done good service. You presented some things to my alma mater, so I'm very happy to know that.
Yes, Larry, and how can folks reach you?
You can reach me at the CommunityTimesSC.com. That's our newspaper in Florence, South Carolina. And my number is 843-621-0056. You can reach me there, or you can reach me online at SE Village Voices, village/voices.com.
Okay. Thank you. And you can reach me, Leo Whitberg, by going to info@newalphacdc.com, or you can reach us by going to our website, www.newalphacdc.com, or you can call us at the church where I pastor Kingdom Living Temple, which is 843-799-0740. And so thank you once again, Congressman. You know I'll be in touch. And thank you for all you do. And we look forward to continuing to have conversation with you and perhaps to work on some things together. And so to all of our friends out there, once again, we want to thank you for tuning in and encourage you to listen to what we bring the community once again next week on the Leo and Larry Show. Thank you.
Thank you.